Hey, it's Nick and Brian from London Real. This week we have James Albury on the show. He's a citizen journalist who's covered Occupy London and Wikileaks' Julian Assange.
Yeah, if you're tired of the mainstream media and want to know what's really going on in the world, you need to give us a watch.
Check it out. This is London motherfucking Real. I am Brian Rose. This is Nick Gabriel, and joining us today is Mr. James Albury, who is a citizen journalist who covered the Occupy movement here in London, and also Julian Assange's recent escape, I could put it, to the Ecuadorian embassy. Welcome, James.
Thank you very much for having me. It's absolutely great to be here. Thank you.
Awesome, man. What is a citizen journalist?
Well, a citizen journalist is somebody who doesn't necessarily have professional journalistic qualifications, and it's basically anybody who's prepared to put their hand up and say, I'll cover that by whatever means. I mean, there's people that write, people that live tweet from situations, and there's people that live stream, there's people like photojournalists who do it on a citizen journalism basis. So it's basically anybody who's interested in news, basically, and is willing and prepared to cover it themselves, despite not necessarily having, as I said, any education or training in it. It's just somebody who wants to do it.
Why do you think we need citizen journalists?
I was gonna say, I kind of anticipated that question in a way. I think there's a lot of problems with what a lot of people refer to as the mainstream media, and that's actually a term that I'm going to stop using because I'm not actually answering your question directly here, but mainstream media is what currently is what people refer to as corporate media. And the reason why I don't want to keep on attacking mainstream media is because they do have a role to play. However, I think they get a lot wrong. They're basically top-down organisations, and citizen journalism works from the grassroots up. And when you turn that on its head like that, it brings a whole load of new information to light. I mean, corporate media, they have their sponsorship and their advertising, etc., and I think that compromises them to a certain extent. There's only so much they can say about a certain business entity or something at risk of pissing off their advertisers or something. As a citizen journalist, you're completely independent. I don't have anything like that holding me back. I can just say what I want, and I can film what I want, and I don't have any stake in any particular outcomes or anything. I can just report facts as closely as I possibly can.
How'd you get into this? I mean, would you wake up one day and think, I'm going to be a citizen journalist?
Well, the way it started for me was when the Occupy movement started here in London, 15th of October last year. I looked at what was going on down there, and then I'd compare it with mainstream reports. And for the most part, not all the time, but a lot of the time, what I was actually witnessing with my own two eyes wasn't really represented entirely fairly in the corporate news, as far as I could see. So that kind of inspired me to be like, well, what can we do about this? And with a bunch of other people there, I didn't actually start live streaming straight away. That was actually only really once Occupy had finished. What I was doing was going around recording with one of those little HD flip cams, and I uploaded a few videos to YouTube. Again, like I emphasise, absolutely no media journalistic experience whatsoever. Never done any video editing in my life or anything like that. Just had to just sort of like work it out as I went along. And I would say that I'm probably still rubbish at doing that. I've found a bit more of a niche within live streaming because, quite honestly, you don't have to edit it. That's kind of the point, that it is just live as it happens. But there was a lot of people that I met down at Occupy. A lot of them were sort of like really crazy, and I didn't agree with them at all. There's a lot of people who really inspired me and helped me out, absolutely tons. And it was just like the associations with those groups of people and that comparison with the corporate media that just made me think, you know, what else can we do? Can we get the information out there ourselves rather than having to rely on big organisations to do it for us, because they clearly won't.
What didn't you think was being reported correctly on Occupy? Because actually Nick and I went down there
question as well,
in November, and we looked around. We weren't doing citizen journalism. I think Nick and I spent 20 minutes down there. But what's the right word? Divergence?
The inaccuracies or the
between
omissions, I guess.
Well, I think you kind of like maybe answered your own question with you spent 20 minutes down there, because I was down there, I was like sleeping on a cold slab floor kind of thing. There was just sort of like every form of humanity there, and it was such a diverse mixture of people. I've never been associated with such a diverse, open kind of thing. And I think that there was a lot of hope, especially in the early days. Particularly, you got down there by November, and I think things were already starting to unravel by that point.
That quick?
Yeah, I would say.
Some outside element starting coming in. Whatever that is. Maybe that was you.
Well, yeah, I mean, there was a lot of people down there working really, really hard, and a lot of the most active people, the people that were really into it for what I would describe possibly as better reasons than some others. And I suffered from this myself a bit. It's just burnout. It's just sheer exhaustion. You spend all day sort of like speaking to people, explaining to them while you're there, or, you know, there's people working really hard in the kitchen. I mean, they were feeding thousands of people a day down there, and all for free. And, you know, that didn't just come out of nowhere. People were donating food, they were donating money, and people were like knitting all that together and making some really amazing meals. But because of the nature of it being so open, and I'm not criticising people for this, but people who are desperate, homeless, drug problems, that kind of thing, they were able to go somewhere where there was, as much as anything, just sort of like somebody who would actually listen to them. Because a lot of these people that were quite troubled, but they didn't feel they could get anybody to understand them or whatever, and that really, really drained people's energy. So
dealing with those people,
yeah, it was basically just sort of like this tidal wave of just stuff. I mean, because there was media there covering it, certainly a lot more so than Occupy Wall Street in the early days. But, you know, that was draining in itself as well. And I think a lot of the most active people really got just burnt out and tired. And by November, I would certainly say things were starting to deteriorate. I would say the first 2 weeks were just extraordinary, absolutely blew my mind.
You know, James, I wanted to ask, did you agree with the Occupy movement?
It's such a broad question. With a lot of what a lot of people who are involved with the Occupy movement are talking about, certainly, yeah, the society has got some big problems. You know, back in 2008, we were told by experts that the economy will be back on track by 2010. When we got 2010, they said, oh, it'll be 2012. Well, here we are, 2012, and they're telling us it'll be 2014. The debt crisis across Europe and across the globe, it runs deep, really deep. A few other issues as well, which I think as a species we've got to start facing up to. And
could you elaborate a little bit on that?
Well, planetary possible ecological crisis. It's not something that I actually worry about massively. I don't know. I'm assuming you guys might be familiar with George Carlin.
Yeah.
I absolutely love his sort of like his attitude to it.
You're sitting back and watching everything burn, right?
Yeah, basically, yeah. It's sort of like life is an absolute freak show, and when you're born in the USA, you get a front row seat, etc. But he also said something I thought that really sort of like hit home with me. Although I try to minimise my consumption just because I don't think people should take more than they need from a society or from what the planet can provide. It does have a carrying capacity. There's only so much stuff here. And for instance, once it's all gone, you know, it's all gone. We need to sort of like start thinking about solutions to it before it's all gone. And I think this is around about the time to do it. I've kind of like lost my thread a little bit. There was I
was just asking if you agreed with the Occupy movement, and then you spoke about the problems we have as a species, and interesting.
The things you didn't agree with the Occupy movement? Because I think people tend to think that since you're covering it, that you're completely in agreement with that and with Assange. So how does that work with you?
Yeah, that's really true. That's very interesting that if you're live streaming something, and I've covered a lot more than just Occupy and Assange. I also try to do quite a lot of local issues as well.
Such as?
There was Leighton Marsh. That was actually the very first live stream that I did, which was back in February this year. Leighton Marsh, for the Olympics, they're building a basketball court on a like open public space. As far as I can see, they basically just rode roughshod over all the usual planning permissions that would be required. And basically, well, it's the Olympics, so this thing's going up. But it affected quite a lot of people. I mean, it's an area of like a special natural interest, like it's a nature reserve. And they're saying this building's going to be temporary, but a lot of the local people were really not too trustful of that actually being the case, because they've got an ice rink there, which when it went up, they were told it was going to be temporary, and that was like 20 years ago or something. So there was a number of people that were involved with the Occupy movement that moved down there. This was pretty much when it finished up at St Paul's. It pretty much coincided with that. So I went down there to cover that first of all. Oh, what else have I done?
Was there some like a police violence protest riots you did or something? Was there a police violence protest that you covered or something?
Yeah, that was a couple of weeks ago. There was an allegation of a man who was violently arrested by a police officer in Brixton, and there was word going out on Twitter, etc., about that. And bearing in mind what happened in London with the riots last year, it was a hot day as well. There seems to be sort of like certain trigger points that, like, if you get like this perfect storm of stuff happen, it can lead to stuff that I would hope no right-minded person really wanted to see. But it'd been a very, very hot day. People are very angry and upset with the fact that they just don't have as much stuff as they used to have. And then you get like a real flashpoint, like Mark Duggan was the spark for the London riots last time. And I heard it on Twitter, and I just wanted to go down and eyeball it, because you get a lot of rumour, and I really, really would encourage people to just treat rumour as rumour, especially like stuff you read on the internet. It's not necessarily true. So when I heard about it on Twitter, I wanted to go down and see down what was happening, and I had the opportunity to live stream that as well. So yeah, basically, if I see something on a social network or something and I'm able to get to it, then I'll go and try cover it. I mean, like, I have a day job and that kind of thing as well. So I can't always be there at all times. So, you know, that's why I'd love to see sort of like an informal network of loads of live streams all across the planet. But
and that's the ultimate objective. I mean, ideally, it's the 100% objective news source, because you're streaming live. There's no editing. There's no cutting. You don't technically have an agenda. I guess we all have agendas, but it's as objective as you can get, in your opinion?
I think so, yeah. I mean, I really do try to be objective. I mean, some of the activism and protests that I've covered, I do have personal feelings about it, and I do feel passionate about it, but I would encourage anybody who's thinking about getting into live streaming, think about what it is that you're doing. If you want to be an activist, then, you know, that's fine, just as long as what you're doing is you're not going to cause harm to anybody else. But I've seen a couple of people who go sort of like kind of like way over the top, and I think that if you're engaging in sort of like some kind of journalistic enterprise, you need to kind of like stick to the journalism, and that can be very, very difficult to do. I know from experience.
Stick to the journalism, as in don't get involved in the actual protest?
Yeah, record what is going on. Document what is going on. I mean, like, you can give opinions by all means, but I really think that far too many people state opinion as fact, whereas what I do when I'm commentating on my live streams is I really do try to say, look, this is what I can see, this is facts as far as I can see, but there'll be other situations where people will ask me on the chat box what I think about a certain thing, and, you know, I'm happy to communicate with the audience. I think the audience participation is one of the like amazing things about it. It's fantastic, but when I'm expressing an opinion, I do try to make it clear to people that it's an opinion, and that, you know, they shouldn't necessarily take that as gospel. And goodness sake, yeah, do your own research on stuff. Don't take my word for anything.
Hopefully, things like citizen journalism and the incredible acceleration of technology, in particular things like video over the internet, will allow us to start to disregard the mainstream media's monopoly, because, man, I got to the point where I just stopped reading newspapers or watching the news because it is so biased. Mm-hmm. It is so biased.
It's worse. It's sensationalized. And so
yeah.
I stopped a long time ago. The London riots, in my opinion, were sensationalized and overcovered enough to where I had buddies in New York calling me up saying, "Are you safe to walk on the streets of London?" Mm-hmm. And I was we're in Shoreditch, which is the edge of Hackney, but I was walking around and there were some shop owners outside looking nervous, but all you saw on the news was like the same footage,
the same building burning over and over again.
And I'm sure it was bad in some parts, but it wasn't the whole city. Do you agree or disagree?
If you would have read the news coverage, you would have thought that the whole of London was on fire. Yeah, from the way you're describing it. I wasn't actually like real in central London as I am like these days at that time, and I certainly wasn't live streaming. I was actually up in like Hertfordshire, but even up there I did sense a little bit of tension. I mean, like there was shop owners near me who were like boarding up. I mean, nothing ever happened, but they did board up, so there was that air of tension on the streets.
Yeah.
But yeah, from what I actually witnessed with my own two eyes, I didn't go into sort of like Tottenham or to Croydon or anything where it apparently did get pretty bad.
Tension was there. It was a really weird feeling. Like you can't put your finger on what it was, but you walked around and you just felt like some uneasiness in everyone's face. It was really weird.
The question I have is, for both of you guys, is I wonder if it's human nature we've all heard that expression that bad news sells, right? And I wonder if the reason for that is because the media has conditioned us to expect these bad stories in the newspaper, or if as human beings we actually want to open the newspaper and hear about the family that was gunned down by a lone nutcase. I mean, I don't know.
We love gossip. I mean, we had Sandra Clark in here, who's a reporter for like a TZM type show on the West Coast, and what she was saying was really bothering me. But I have to admit that I'm guilty sometimes of looking at the sensationalist headline and being like, "Tom Cruise did what? Oh, I don't care." But then I looked.
Man, on the way over here on the tube, like I actively, when I see a newspaper, literally, to me, it's like a poisonous thing, a dirty thing. I don't want to go anywhere near it.
Like the Metro or something.
Well, any newspaper. Like, I sat next to this woman on the train, and she was reading her paper, and the headline was "Shot in the head on holiday," and I was like, why the fuck would I want that in my brain? Why would I want that piece of information floating around my brain? Do you know what I mean? It's just why.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, like what you're saying about just really avoiding the mainstream media as far as possible. I mean, like I've used that term again, mainstream media.
Whereas you prefer the term corporate media?
Yeah, I think use the term corporate media because, if I have my way, and possibly if you have your way, live streaming, etc., will become the mainstream. So you never know when that point is going to sort of like tip, when the changeover is going to be. So if you constantly decrying mainstream media as a term, then as the organisations, certainly I don't have. I'm not very keen on them. But
do you think it'll ever get to the point where like BBC News or the Telegraph or Sky News just don't exist because there's a million people out there with super high definition iPhone 6s and are just streaming stuff as it happens from all over the globe?
I think that's possible. I don't necessarily know if it's an entirely good thing. I haven't completely made up my own mind about this, to be completely frank. I think that professionalism in journalism, it certainly has a role to play because there's checks and balances there. And, when it comes to covering stuff on the streets, perhaps live streaming is appropriate. But then, how far is it going to go? Is it sort of like going to be like really intruding in people's private lives, etc.? I
haven't thought about that corollary. If people are just jumping out and doing candid streaming, when you're not looking.
What about when we're famous from London Real and people are like streaming? Yeah, you're gonna freak out when that happens. I can see that.
But what did you think about Nick's question? As far as do we have a natural tendency as humans to love to read the scandal? I mean, are we just as guilty?
I think that it's interesting. You said that you avoid the newspapers, etc., as much as possible. I don't know if you do or not,
I try.
Yeah,
I pick one newspaper, but it's like I think it's okay, but sometimes I even think it's selling me a load of goods.
It's the New York Times, right?
Yeah, the Herald Tribune, which is the international version. But
okay. I think they all have an agenda of some sort, and as I said at the start of the show, that they've all got advertisers to pay. So I don't ever know if you'll always get the complete truth from them. Okay. What was the question?
Do we have a tendency to, as humans, to want to, as Nick was saying, the BBC sensationalizes, but isn't that exactly what we want?
If it bleeds, it leads.
But is that what we really want as humans?
I think it's up to the individual human. What I can tell you is that, for the most part, my streams which get the most views tend to be the ones that involve some kind of action, shall we say. Okay. A couple of times when the police, from my point of view at least, have been sort of like quite heavy-handed, unnecessarily so. Those tend to be the ones that get the most amount of views. So I don't know if that's just people want to see the violence, like the riot porn, as it's sometimes called,
right.
Or if it's just that people are waking up to the fact that so much media is just sort of like a nonsense. It's just sort of like a...
Maybe it's just a symptom of our society. I mean, I don't think... I always use the Buddhist monks as an example, but I don't think people in Tibet want to hear about Brad Pitt's latest infidelity or...
What about the Dalai Lama's latest?
Yeah.
No, I agree with you mean. These guys are probably completely trying to absolve their minds of this kind of...
Yeah.
As I think that more, I mean, like one of the things that I say on my streams quite regularly actually is I encourage people to throw their newspapers in the bin, chuck the telly out the window, and there's so many sources of news on the internet, and a lot of them are a lot more independent than the current existing paradigm. So there's loads of stuff that you can find if you're prepared to search a little bit. If you're just going to look on BBC News, before Occupy started, I thought the BBC was sort of like a pretty objective, unbiased, balanced organisation. But some of the things that I've seen on the streets and then the way they've been reported later.
Could you give us an example?
Let's see if I can pick one out off the top of my head. Well, the one that jumps into my mind is Occupy. I saw some reports which just weren't representative to me. I'll tell you what, I'll take an example that's completely outside of that. Going to a football match or something, and then I'll read the report or something after, and I'll be like, were these people at the same game? Or did they just kind of like make it up? They got the score right. I'll give them that much. But apart from that, they just didn't seem to sort of like what they're reporting didn't seem to have any basis in. But
to be fair, that's just like human subjectivity at its best, because you could have written a similar report and the guy could have read yours and said the exact same thing.
Very true, and that's one of my favourite quotes. Is there's no such thing as truth, only perspective.
I like that.
So, yeah, what one person sees and what another person sees, they can both witness the same thing. Ask them later what they saw; they'll both give different accounts. But they're both telling the truth.
I guess they're trying to sell papers too.
I've said a similar thing to Brian before, which is a quote from one of my favorite teachers, and he says, everyone's perspective is different and the perspective is always changing from day to day. It's exactly the same thing, right? Yeah,
well, this is sort of like I can say for sure, I change my mind about stuff all the time. And I'm not afraid to do so. I wish a few more people would be, because some people can get really sort of like dug into like a dogma, and once that happens, I think you're in quite a dangerous place.
If they built their identity around the peer group that has the dogma, if they're I'm an Occupy guy, I'm a Zeitgeist guy, right? And your identity gets built up your peer group, and then if you change your mind, you're like, wait a second, I'm losing my identity.
Yeah,
a bit. But I think to answer Nick's question, I think that we're already seeing that shift from the corporate media to the non-corporate, whether it's live news or something like this podcast or Rogan's podcast or something. I think other people are already tuning in to different ways of getting their media. And I don't think it's always because it's an advertiser issue. I just think it's sometimes it's just completely different perspective. I always wonder if the New York Times is really swayed by their advertisers. I know their board is set up where they make decisions that's not based on the stock price, but one thing that what you bring is at least an independent perspective.
One of the other things you mentioned there, because advertisers, sure, that's one thing. One of the great things that I think about live streaming is that it does give perspective, because very often on the mainstream news, if there is a protest or something, they will cover the bit where the police come in, but that's only for like 1 minute, and very often there'll have been sort of like 6 hours that actually led up to that. And a really good example is, I can't remember if it was last week or the week before, but Disabled People Against Cuts, in association with UK Uncut, two activist organisations here in the UK, they organised a protest against Atos, a French IT company who are in charge of these work assessments. That's a pretty long story, but if people want to check that out, look on Twitter for the hashtag Atos, have a look at Deepak.
ATOS.
Yeah, ATOS. Okay. And check out ukuncut.org.uk, I think, and also deepak.org.uk.
Okay.
It's DPAC, Disabled People Against Cuts.
So what was the difference that you saw between your 6 hours and that 1 minute of footage?
Oh, well, okay. I didn't stream the whole 6 hours, but there was one really thing that really occurred to me is like in terms of perspective. At this Deepak protest, they moved on away from Atos to a DWP office right down near Westminster. And you had a few people on megaphones. There was people inside who, before arrival, had chained themselves to the DWP office. But the office itself was sealed off. There were police at the door. Nobody was trying to gain access to the building. There was a row of people with disabilities in front of the building, and they've been talking on making announcements on megaphone, chanting, that kind of thing. But entirely peaceful, entirely non-violent. I think protest is an essential part of a healthy functioning democracy. If you're only allowed to protest in the way, the shape, the form, and at the time and the place where the state tells you,
it's not even a protest.
that's not a protest. And there's a lot of rights and freedoms which have been gained through protest, and people that are just blanket no to protest don't want to have a real think about if they want to live in a Stasi East German type state, or if they want to live in a supposedly free country. But anyway, there was no problem at all. But the police came in from the side and basically decided that they were going to form an even thicker cordon around this building, and it looked really, really ugly on the live stream because you've got people pushing and shoving and they're shouting and all that kind of thing, and that would be the bit that you see on the mainstream news. Okay. What you don't see on the corporate media is the 8 minutes that preceded it, where there was just no problem. It was just, where did they come from? Why did that happen? And I think that is giving more and more people who are tuning into live streams, it's giving them an opportunity to see what actually happens. And because they're seeing a lot more truth in that way, they're getting a wider, broader perspective. And I think that that's really, really important for people, because quite honestly, I think sometimes, sad as it is, if protesters are getting hit by the police with batons or pepper sprayed or something, there is a very, very large portion of society out there that basically just internally goes, good, put in hippies, get back to work, kind of thing. But if they...
Are you looking at me? Get him!
I think if those people saw these bits that they miss, usually, or have missed up until now, they might start to question a little bit exactly what role does the state play in a free society and in protest.
I saw one of your videos in James is outside the Ecuadorian embassy. I think it's post-Assange move over there, and there was a police officer, and you were filming at night, and at one point you said to him, excuse me, but I think I have the right to be here on the sidewalk, and also I'm streaming this live to people on the internet. And I was just wondering, first of all, do you need to know all of your legal rights when you're doing this, and is that a big factor? And second of all, do you see a reaction in police when you tell them what you're doing, or when they see a recording of a phone? But that's one thing. The second thing is it's live on the internet now. Does that change the game and how you get reacted to?
I think it does change the game a little bit. The first thing you said was, should people inform themselves of their rights? And I think they definitely should do. If you're in a public place, then you have every right to photograph and film as much as you like. And you will get private security and police tell you that you can't do this and you can't do that. But you need to know your rights. Yeah. You can ask them, okay, well, is that an order or a request? Because if it's an order, then you might want to think about carrying it out. If they are ordering you, then you need to ask them under what section of the law. Because a lot of the time, quite honestly, they'll just make this stuff off the top of their heads because they'll just try to intimidate you.
Just bully you out of there.
Yeah, that happened to you the other day in Waterloo Station.
Yeah, so I went, when we had Jacques Fresco on last week on the show, and I went to Waterloo with one of our cameramen just to film us greeting him at the station, and he pulled the camera out, and we basically got surrounded by 3 policemen, and they're like, are you filming, and of course I said no, and it had a big boom mic on there, but they asked for ID, and they were really hassling us. If I didn't have to pick up Jacques, 96-year-old Jacques, I think I might have been pushed a little bit further, but I was really nice and calm. But he said it's actually private property because Waterloo is a train station, and also since there's a terrorist threat, it was the Paralympic Games, they say photography is allowed, movies aren't allowed, but they got up in our grills pretty quickly, and they tried the intimidation factor, and I was very polite, but it kind of shocked me.
I think it's good to be polite.
I agree.
You don't have to turn it into a confrontation. Sometimes people are looking for a confrontation. If there's two people that really clued me up on my rights, they're not everybody's cup of tea, but I'd suggest have a look on the internet for Danny Shine. He's the spiritual entertainer on YouTube.
Okay.
And the other one would be Charlie Veach, who quite a lot of people in the UK at least know as quite quite an interesting character as an activist.
A few of our fans have requested that we have Charlie Weich as a guest on the show.
I think he'd make an interesting guest. Yeah. It's sort of like I see Charlie out and about sometimes, and actually he's one of the people that inspired me to sort of like start doing like a videography kind of thing. I don't agree with everything that he says.
And why do you mention those two specifically?
Because they're really clued up on their rights.
Okay.
Clued up on their rights. I got an awful lot of information from both of their videos, and that they were working as a team for a little while, but I don't think they're doing that quite so much anymore. Those two very, very clued up on their rights, and I didn't just take their word for it. I actually researched it myself, and it turns out that they're right.
I don't believe that. I mean, personally, I think if the government wants you to stop, your rights mean nothing to them. Like, if they really want to shut you up, they're gonna have some dudes come throw you in a van and take you away, and you can say under this act whatever, I'm allowed to be here, but that means nothing to them. I think they are it's so far beyond that now that
I don't think I think they could do that specifically to a certain number of people, but I don't think they have the bandwidth to do that to say 10,000 people. So I think if everybody does know their rights and take a stand, then you can get a lot more freedom. I agree. If somebody wants to Guantanamo your ass, they will do it.
Guantanamo is the example I was thinking of.
Sorry, you were saying about knowing your rights and then.
The other question that you asked was, does it change things when you're holding sort of like a camera up? I mean,
first of all, it's a camera phone. That must have changed the game a lot in the last 2 years. We know it has, obviously.
Absolutely, it has. I mean, like on the one hand, police and professional press won't take it too seriously, because as far as they're concerned, it's just a mobile phone. Particularly for professional press, won't really take it seriously. It's something to do with a mobile phone or whatever. They just kind of like be pretty dismissive of what it is that you're actually doing. Most of them don't even realise what's going on.
Are these your peers, your fellow reporter peers you're talking about?
Oh no, I'm talking about the professional corporate press. Because sometimes when things get a little bit crowded, they're sort of like pushy and shovey, and you're in a public space, and they'll kind of like wave their press pass at you and be like, I've got a bit more right to be here than you do. And like, no, you don't. You're in a public space, and
so just elbowing for real estate. You mean?
Basically just to try and get a shot, because it can get very, very crowded at times.
Interesting.
You mentioned about that police officer, like the thing in the evening, and because he asked me to stop filming him.
Oh, to stop filming him.
Yeah, if it's the one I'm thinking of, there was definitely one outside the Ecuadorian embassy where a police officer said, "Can you stop filming me?" So I asked him, "Was that an order or a request?" And I know that the answer has to be it's a request, because there's no legal basis to actually require you to stop filming. He's a public servant in a public place. So I just checked that it is a request, confirm that, and once it is, sorry, I'm not going to comply with the request. There's a lot of people watching this on the internet, and they're relying on the information. So I don't have to justify myself any further than that. But
do you get a reaction to that statement when you tell them it's live streaming? Or do you feel a bit better? Do you feel safer?
I think in some ways it does help protect you a little bit. Because I think the police are aware with the Ian Tomlinson case after the G20, that some of the most damning footage of police violence tends to come from amateur journalists, or people not even journalists, they just happen to be there at the time and they just capture something on a mobile phone.
Occupy Wall Street had something with the white shirt police and stuff, really beating up people.
Sure they did. Maybe those guys weren't quite as clued up as to what was going on. I don't know, I can't really explain it. I think that maybe the UK police are maybe a little bit more reticent, especially in the atmosphere following the Tomlinson case.
Was this the guy that was arrested in Brixton?
No, Ian Tomlinson was a newspaper. Check out the footage on YouTube of this. If you do a search for Ian Tomlinson on YouTube, it will come up straight away. He was G20 protest in, I think it was 2008.
Oh, this is the guy that died of a heart attack when he was pushed down in the city.
He was not even taking part in any protest.
Yeah, that was the footage was really damning on that one.
I thought so.
He was selling. He was a black cabbie or selling newspapers.
He's a newspaper
salesman. Yeah.
I mean, he certainly sounded like he had problems. His family openly admitted he was an alcoholic. Perhaps he had cirrhosis of liver or whatever. But there's something in law that I can't remember the exact name of it, but even if something that you do, such as pushing someone over, I wouldn't necessarily, if I pushed you over, I wouldn't really expect it to kill you. But if it did kill you as a result of some other side consequence, some condition that you had that I wasn't aware of, then I would still be culpable of manslaughter, if not necessarily murder. But there's a little way to run on that, because although the attempted prosecution was ultimately unsuccessful, I think the family of Ian Tomlinson are going to launch a civil case as well. And from where I see, from what I've seen, I can certainly understand why.
You know, Bros, I've been thinking a lot about, I don't know how I'm going to tie this into the current conversation, but the fact that we need video evidence to protect us against policemen who abuse their power. You know, you once said something like human beings are inherently lazy and etc. And you know, Jacques Fresco really made me think. I looked into some more of his stuff. We had this guy Jacques Fresco on the show last week.
I've been following Mr. Fresco for a couple of years. That's a great show. I enjoyed watching it very much.
So, and I mean, he visited these Polynesian islands and spent time with tribes that had no contact with Western society. And I mean, it was his experience, and others have reported the same thing, that by and large they're relatively peaceful, stable people, you know, and
without the concept of money, right?
Without the concept of money, and without a lot of other negative concepts that we have. You know, I'm not saying money's negative, but I'm just wondering the fact that we have to be monitored and controlled and CCTV'd, and I mean, isn't it a function of the fact that we are doing something wrong? You know, like maybe there's something wrong with this whole system, which comes back to what you said earlier in the show. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, this is, I can see why, it's all kind of like interrelated. And you asked a question earlier, but I didn't really get to finish, but I think that this will sort of like help with that one about Occupy. Do you agree with it or not? I kind of like, I think I got this from Rogan as well, in truth. He kind of like got the impression that just because there's a bunch of people saying there's something wrong, they know that there's something wrong, but just because they don't know exactly how to fix it, that doesn't mean that they're not right to point it out. And I guess that analogy kind of like fits in with that.
Oh, that's an interesting point.
Yeah. So,
I just wish Occupy had something concrete to show for all that sitting there and all that discourse and shouting into megaphones and sitting around drinking soup on cold winter evenings. You know, I mean, what have they got to show for it?
You weren't impressed with those people down there.
I wasn't, bro. Because
you weren't disgusted, but you were really not impressed, right?
What did they do, Brian? Like right now,
protesting.
But what difference has all that protest made? Has it changed any of the bank's policies? Has it changed any discrepancies in wealth between the rich and the poor? Has it done anything? I mean, I'd like to know. Maybe I'm missing something.
But is that how you should judge it?
I don't know. I don't know. I don't have the answer, but...
Or is the protest itself a success?
I can say that from my experience of it, it's really hard to say how people would be feeling if the whole Occupy thing had never have happened. You know, we'll never know, because that's probably some other separate branch of a multiverse or something like that. What Occupy did do was, for the very first time, you saw people organise globally, all at once, a whole load of people all decide to do the same thing. And that was, on the follow-on from Occupy Wall Street, the call went out from them for everybody to occupy globally on the 15th of October. And what do you know? Like somewhere, people say like somewhere between 900 and 1,000 cities on the 15th of October actually went for it. So I think that it proved that if people decide that they want to do something, we do now have the means to be able to do it, like on a global basis. So that's a good thing. I mean, like think of like the potential for that going forward for things that are a little bit more positive than having to just simply fight against the system. I think that you're kind of right. What did Occupy achieve? For my money, far too many people spend far too much time complaining about a system, when I think that what we should all be trying to do really is something productive to change it.
Was that the flaw with it, because they weren't offering a solution per se?
Yeah, I don't think it was necessarily Occupy's role to offer a solution, because I don't think they could do. I think like the interconnectedness of all the different problems and the law of unintended consequences says that even if you did make one demand and it was fixed, it can have a completely adverse effect on something that you never would have expected. It's kind of like... It's
the law of unintended consequences.
Yeah.
Okay, where'd you get that from, James?
I don't think I can answer you. I don't know. Just it's an expression that I've used before. I'm not going to say that it's original, because it might not be, but it might be original.
The first thing that came to mind when you said that is when we had Barefoot Doctor on the show, and he was speaking about how he asked his friend, he said, do you think it would be bad karma to sleep with this married woman? And the guy said, how do you know it wouldn't be bad karma to not sleep with her? Do you know what I mean? That's interesting. Interesting.
Well, I guess I see Jane's perspective as in maybe it was a success that it actually occurred. And I mean, I agree. I mean, there's nothing practical. And so many people told me what you said. What did it do? What are they going to do? But I guess you could say it was a success that it just happened. And I think we can't overestimate the fatigue factor of people being down there every day. And they were at Finsbury Park right by me here. And you see them every day and you're like, how much longer can they do that?
I mean, what were your thoughts on the Occupy movement?
Thing?
Yeah, specifically what they stood for.
I
be
thought,
as honest as you can.
Yeah, I always am. I thought that I was appreciative of what they were doing. I wasn't naysaying and saying there's no solution. They're just pointing the finger because they weren't offering a solution, but they were protesting. Maybe they didn't know why they were protesting, but they were.
But do you even see a problem?
That was a success. Yeah, I think there is a problem. I don't know about the 1% and the pointing fingers from the 99% to the 1%, although it was a great tagline and a great slogan that went viral. But I don't know. I think a lot of people, I mean, we had Zeitgeist on and they were trying to find out how to work with them. And I know they didn't want to work with them. And I'm finding this a lot with Venus, Zeitgeist, Occupy, where there's not a lot of cooperation, but then maybe inherently there isn't cooperation in these movements since there's no leader in these movements.
Yeah. The other thing that I'd have to say about Occupy as well is a lot of, I think, the good things that have come out of it are just completely unseen, because the connections that I've made with people that I met down there or as a consequence of being there are just phenomenal, and they've like led my life in directions that I never would have expected at all, and like really, really positively as well. And I'm just one of how many people occupied globally or had even some sympathy with it or went and visited an Occupy site. I don't know if there's any way you can ever measure any figure on that. Was it millions? Possibly.
Probably millions.
Yeah, I would think probably millions. And I think a lot of people would have had their lives touched in a very positive way, and it would have given them some thoughts and some ideas on how to move forward. And that's something that you can't measure. It's just sort of like we like to see sort of like measurable results, and we like to see them pretty quickly. But that's not necessarily always possible. And the other thing that anybody involved with Occupy always said was it's going to be a long haul. That the world isn't going to be changed overnight, and it's certainly not going to be changed by camping necessarily.
Yeah. I want to ask you.
I want to ask you something as well. Go for it.
I just want to talk about Julian Assange, and I want to get actually Nick's opinions first for some reason. But before we do that, I just want to thank our sponsor, which is Alpha Brain. James has just taken an Alpha Brain, although he refused caffeine, which made me even more impressed by that. And it's a nootropic. Hopefully we'll give you some lucid dreams tonight. Sounds like you're a fan. But if you'd like some Alpha Brain or some Shroom Tech, that's the Alpha Brain. Nick's got the Shroom Tech. Then go to onit.com, use the customer code LondonReal, and you get 10% off and support the show. In the meantime, Nick, Julian Assange, he's at the Ecuadorian embassy. What do you think about the whole thing?
I'm so disgusted by it. Words fail me.
By that he's going there, or by what?
Just by virtue of the fact that he is someone who revealed government secrets, and he's been so vilified by governments for doing that. I don't think governments should have secrets. I really don't.
What about you, James?
I think that what's really important to do is to separate Julian Assange from Wikileaks. Obviously, he's put a lot into it. I mean, like, it's basically sort of like his project, but there's people working with it as well. If it was not so reliant on Mr. Assange, then perhaps it could have been set up in a way whereby something like Occupy, where it's just sort of like, there is literally no leader. I mean, people say, oh, they're always going to try and pin it on someone or whatever, but I don't know. But it seems that Julian Assange and WikiLeaks are really conflated. I mean, personally speaking, I'm with you on sort of like open government. I mean, like, if there's going to be sort of like a state, it needs to be open. We need to see where the money that we pay in tax, what it's being spent on, because the amount that's spent on war, etc., is absolutely ridiculous. And if I had a way to not contribute towards that. I mean, because in a way, I'm complicit in some of the UK's foreign policy.
What about diplomacy? What about diplomacy? Should all of our U.S. intelligence be transparent? Should we tell Osama bin Laden the night before we're going to go in? I mean, there's diplomacy. Should we have secrets about Putin or intelligence that we tell everyone? I mean, there is a point where you have to agree that you can't have complete transparency to run a nation.
The question is...
Well, that's the question.
You to take it one step further back and say, why are we in the situation where we're at war with Afghanistan, and why? Do you know what I mean?
Every country always acts in its own interests, and that by definition, we can question sovereignty, but you have to agree that there is a place for diplomacy. Well, maybe you don't.
Well, ultimately, I mean, we're a long, long, long way from this, but certainly can't see it happening in my lifetime. But ultimately, the borders, countries, that kind of thing, they're meaningless.
Yeah, I completely agree.
And we had a question about that on Facebook, asking about sovereignty and why is it paramount? Which is, it comes down to Julian being at the Ecuadorian embassy, because this is a question now of sovereignty. It's kind of dictating what's happening here, right?
Well, do you know, that was the thing that actually first led me down there to start live streaming, because my immediate concern, quite honestly, wasn't for Julian Assange. It was for the potential that the UK might invade sovereign territory was actually the thing that really led me down there. There was the internet rumour, perhaps, would later turned out not to be, that the communique sent from the UK to the Ecuadorian embassy, it looked a little bit to me like a veiled threat.
What did it say?
I can't remember the exact wording, but it was a reminder to the Ecuadorians that the UK would reserve the right to revoke their status as an embassy, if necessary.
For people that don't know, and viewers, could you, if you know, can you explain the legal issues behind an embassy and an embassy located in a country? Is it legally a small piece of that country, or are there caveats on that?
Yeah, well, I'm not a legal expert, but my understanding of it is the Vienna Convention of 1971, something like that. It basically states that an embassy is considered sovereign territory of the nation which is holding that embassy. So technically speaking, it is an invasion if you encroach onto it without invite.
Okay.
Brian,
yes.
You asked Jack Fresco last week if he was made president of the USA, what he would do. And I want to ask you, if you were made president of the Global World Federation, let's say there was one, what would be the first thing you would do?
I will answer that, but I do want to talk about this Ecuadorian thing one more time, and then I'll give you that. I was actually down there at the embassy like a week ago, and I went down there with my stepdaughter, and we chat, as you do.
Stepdaughter.
And she's 8, and I was telling her what Julian Assange did, and she looks at me and she's like, "So he told the truth?" And I was like, "What are you talking about?" No, I was like, "Okay, this is an interesting perspective from an 8-year-old." And then we talked to the police officer, and I said, "Are you here to grab Julian on the way out, or are you here to protect the public, or to make sure that something doesn't, like a riot or something, doesn't happen? Or what is your role?" And he was quite frank. I found that this police officer was quite open and chatty. Maybe that's their way they deal with the public.
Some are.
Yeah, some are. And
there are people behind the uniform.
Yeah, of course. And he said, actually, there are some rumors that there might be tunnels underneath the building. It's a night bridge. They don't know if he's still there. I was like, technically, can you grab him? And he's like, I really can't comment on we're not quite sure if we can actually go in there and grab him, or if we're not doing it because we haven't been told, or if we can legally do it. But I guess they are ready to grab him if he comes out. And I just had a lot of discussions about that with him, just from a legal standpoint.
Yeah, I asked police officers that I asked 2 separate ones, pretty much the same question. Are you here to, maintain public order? Stop people from invading the embassy, for instance, might happen, because there's a lot of people that are quite fanatical about him. Julian Assange, which I can sort of understand. The other thing I wanted to say about Julian Assange is that I think people should, and I'm not in any way sort of I have no idea whether he's guilty or not of the allegations which he's facing in Sweden.
Right.
No idea whatsoever.
Just for the record, he is trying to be extradited to Sweden to face sexual allegations from a woman there, and I think he's concerned that once he's in Sweden, he could be extradited to the U.S. to face Wikileaks issues. Am I right in that?
Yeah, that is apparently his concern, that he'll be further extradited onto the USA.
I'll let you finish. You were saying about whether he was guilty or not, or
right? Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I wasn't there in the room at the time, so I'm not able to say. I really, really object to people, and I've seen this on the internet, who's saying he is a rapist. I think that's an absolutely disgraceful thing to say, because none of us are in possession of all the facts.
But you can't say he's not either.
Well, this is
That's
the thing.
true.
I don't know if he is or if he isn't.
Okay.
It's sort of like, yeah, and I think that more people should bear that in mind. But I do think that the allegations which he's facing are very, very serious, and I think he should find a way to deal with them. And it seems the way to do that might be to go to Sweden. And if he is further extradited onto the USA, he's done a really good job of getting publicity for his cause. So I think that if he was extradited onto the USA, people would really sort of like start to ask questions, because what I've seen and read so far says that there isn't really any legal basis, or that any request from the USA to Sweden to extradite him, it will likely be refused. That it would have to go via the UK as well, and with the European Convention on Human Rights, if he was facing, like for instance, a death penalty or something, then they simply can't extradite in those circumstances.
They can't.
They can't. An EEC country cannot extradite to a country where the charges laid against somebody would be like death penalty.
Okay. But this wouldn't be in this case, so they still could extradite him?
Do you mean from Sweden
Yeah.
to the USA?
Can they extradite him from the UK?
Well, this is one of
Are
the
there
other
no
things.
charges yet?
I mean,
We don't know.
Do you mean can they get extradited from the UK to Sweden or to the USA?
To the USA, direct.
Well, the USA haven't made any request for extradition.
Okay.
So you can't sort of like there's nothing there at the moment. The USA haven't made any request to extradite.
What do you say to and I'm going to just assume here, maybe this is unfair, Nick. What do you say to the Nick Gabriels of the world that say this is all an elaborate scheme cooked up by the US and the CIA just to grab him for exposing these secrets that embarrassed him? There's no sexual thing. It's all been overblown, and this is just... What do you say to that?
It's definitely possible.
That's a horrible answer.
It's definitely
You
possible.
can say that about anything, right?
Yeah.
What have you seen on the ground that we haven't when you've been there? That you could enlighten with us, or a perspective, or have you?
Yeah, okay. I don't think I've seen too much outside there. That I mean, maybe I'm completely wrong. I probably have to review some of my streams, to be honest. I haven't had a chance to do that yet. What I'm seeing is a mixture of people who are... I think people should be really careful to sort of like avoid placing people on pedestals, because people can do the most amazing things, and I like really applaud a lot of Julian Assange's work with Wikileaks. I think they've done some amazing things. I really, really do, very, very much behind it, as in principle, totally behind the Wikileaks project.
Right. I actually am too.
But
What?
when it... Just because good people are still capable of doing bad things,
Yeah.
and I'm not saying that means that he is guilty by any stretch of imagination, but I don't think anybody should be placing anybody on a pedestal. And if it's a big if he is guilty, then rule of law, etc. He should sort of like have to pay the penalty for that if it's proven properly and fully.
I think as a society, we haven't evolved yet to follow a leaderless organization. I'm curious what you think about this, because the fact that it's Julian Assange, he's so affected with this movement, and you empathize with him, and you see his flaws, you see his successes.
He's a figurehead,
but
basically.
with like Zeitgeist, everyone wanted Joseph to be that guy, but he doesn't want to be that guy because maybe the movement doesn't want. And I think people, and same with Occupy, I think maybe we're not
naturally
evolved.
gravitate towards a leader they have to
maybe
have.
we need to have a leader. We need to be told what to do. And I don't know. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I'd have to agree with you, man. I agree.
We think we'll get there someday, or what are your thoughts?
Well, if there's one thing that I think Occupy have kind of like started to angle towards, possibly more so than, for instance, WikiLeaks or Zeitgeist Movement or even Venus Project, something like that, is if there's one thing you definitely don't do about Occupy is you don't pin like a figurehead in it, not a single figurehead. And I think the expression leaderless movement is an interesting one, but how about a leaderful movement? Where everybody's the leader. That's
Language is everything.
Yeah.
I think it inherently violates human nature. As you said, I don't think... In fact, I have a very good friend who's a philosopher, and he advises the US government on foreign policy. He's very experienced with political economy. And he said, he predicted when I said to him, when the Occupy thing was at its peak, I said, what's going to happen to this? And he said it will recede to where it came from without anything anything happening, and he said the main reason is because it's leaderless. He said that's not the way human society or human beings work. We require figureheads to galvanize our cause. And that's what happened.
But we also have this new information-intense medium, so maybe with that it can change. Maybe
that's a really good point.
Maybe it can evolve to a leaderful movement. I don't know. There are some advantages to having a leaderful movement or a leaderless movement.
Yeah, I think so. I mean,
because Occupy can grow organically really quickly, right?
Yeah, sure. I mean, like there are advantages to having sort of like figureheads. I mean, like a great example would be the civil rights movement in the US with Martin Luther King, etc. Somebody who's sort of like really passionate, somebody prepared to sort of like lead by example, and I'm sure that I know that the civil rights movement was about a lot more than just Martin Luther King. There was an awful lot of people that worked really, really hard and put themselves in really dangerous positions, and they were prepared to make those sacrifices because it was a cause that was right. They really believed in it. But you kind of like you look at what happened to him. Unfortunately, obviously assassinated, and this happens sort of like time and time again. You put people. And that might be what's happening with Julian Assange. Mm-hmm. If somebody is up there to be shot at, then they will be. So
that's true.
I think that if people do want to create a better world, we probably, we haven't got a lot of practice at it yet, but maybe like Occupy is like a little practice episode for cooperation. There's, I personally think that if we are going to like really achieve anything, actually really progress, then we are going to have to cooperate with each other a lot more. And
Matt, I'm not going to let you duck that question.
I'm going to answer the question. I'll do it. We're actually almost up, but I wanted to actually spend a little extra time and ask some extra questions. But before our time goes up, how do people contact you? How can people get involved and do their own journalism? And is there any parting thoughts that you want to give us before we chop our iTunes listeners out as far as what you do? There is definitely. Well, if people want to reach me, they can get me on Twitter at AlburyJ. That's ALBURYJ. I'm on Facebook, again, facebook.com/AlburyJ, all the social networks and that kind of thing. My Bambuser channel is Bambuser. Bambuser is spelled BAMBUSER. That's .com/channel/AlburyJ. So there's loads of ways that people can connect with me. That's something that I'm actually really keen to do, because one of the ideas that I have is I'd like to motivate more people, inspire them into citizen journalism. I think it's something that anybody can do. It's not necessarily something that everybody should do, because there are certain things where certain situations you can be in a little bit of danger, quite honestly, and there's a few things that I'd like to sort of like point out to people to help keep them safe as much as anything, because like safety and your liberty are like the most important things before you can start getting too excited about it. So what I want to do is I'm going to produce an open source guide to what I know. With it being open source, people can contribute to it, because there's going to be tons of stuff that I haven't thought of. There's loads of live streamers all over the world. I mean, like I connect with them on Twitter and on Facebook, etc. And if we can sort of like put our heads together and produce a kind of like a few guides, both video and written, I'd love people to get involved with that. So if they want to get in touch with me, they feel they can contribute to it, or if they just want to find me on a social network somewhere so that they can have a look at it once it's ready. I'm thinking probably around about 2 or 3 weeks it will be ready, so it's not very far off. I've got a basic structure to it, but yeah, I'd really like other people to do what I do, because imagine if we have every corner of the globe covered in people who don't necessarily do it a lot, but they've at least got a live streaming application on their phone. If something happens and it's near them, then they can be there, because there's a lot more people on the planet than there are corporate journalists, so we can get there first, we can tell the story a lot more fully. It's just a case of like having sheer numbers. So I think once we achieve a critical mass, going back to something that you asked earlier, I do think it can revolutionise journalism, because even if it doesn't become the regular thing, it certainly forces professional journalism to be more honest. It kind of like puts them in a position where they look pretty stupid if their live pictures don't look anything like the live pictures coming from elsewhere, if they're just sort of like being selective with their angles or something like that.
Hopefully it will ultimately give us all a clearer picture of reality and what's happening in the world.
Yeah, we could. I think the more information you have, the better placed you are to make decisions and to make judgments. I mean, I think we should all be a little bit less judgmental, but The more information you have, the better
I think
judgment
that's
you can
awesome.
make.
I think it's really cool you're going to open source that. I don't think we could have enough citizen journalists. I don't think we can have enough podcasts. I encourage
Absolutely.
everybody to do their own version of London Real wherever you are, and to be ready to film. And I just don't think we can have too much information because, like you said, worst case, it checks the mainstream media, it checks the government, it checks the police, it checks anybody as far as what they're doing. So I'm a big fan of that. So anyways, we're going to come back with some questions. Nick's going to grill me, and I'm going to ask you some more questions from our viewers. If you want to get this footage, just go to londonreal.tv, put in your email address, and we'll send this separately in a couple days. I think it goes out Monday, and this will be out on Sunday. And in 3 weeks, Nick and I are in LA to meet Mr. Rogan, and that should be fun.
Fantastic.
Yeah, it's going to be cool.
That should be cool. So thanks a lot, James, for coming on. And until then,
Thank you so much for having me. Great experience.
excellent.
It's about the journey.
All right, peace, guys.
Genetically and biochemically on the inside as we are on the outside. In the last year, my dad got diagnosed with stage 3B lung cancer, and you don't really come back from that, and that sucks. And that was terrifying. And I thought I was a pretty strong guy, but then